All right, guys. All right, let's dive right in. So a bit of a review. Last week we were describing the two different obligations of learning. One was learning halacha psuka, and the other was called limud Torah. And they're both different obligations in learning. Halacha psuka is learning every halacha. It's straightforward. Go through the Mishnah Torah, and then you will have done the mitzvah saseh of learning the kol Torah kula. And you hear that term thrown around, like everyone's like, oh, how can you learn the whole Torah? Well, you just learn the straightforward halacha. It doesn't take so long. Read a chapter a day of the Rambam, you'll be done 3 years. Read 3 chapters a day, you'll be done in a year. It's online in English. Go on to Chabad.com. They have the entire Mishnah Torah translated in English. Slam that thing. You're all obligated. Doesn't matter you're women. Do it. So that was to do this. Halacha psuka. Yes.
To read the whole Torah?
To read the whole Mishnah Torah.
Just
yes.
Open the Chumash and read through that.
Nope, that is not halacha psuka. It is knowing every single halacha, every single obligation and prohibition.
But isn't that written in the written Torah?
Nope, not directly.
Oh.
No, not directly at all.
Including reading Rashi or something.
Nope, won't get it with Rashi. Rashi's agenda with the text was to make to resolve the contradictions between Agada and the written text. But he's not getting in halacha. It's a mitzvah saseh to learn the entire Torah, which means every halacha, every obligation, every prohibition. So get on Chabad.org, start now, because you're all obligated. So that was the first obligation in learning Torah, halacha psuka. The second was limud Torah. And what we described over there was, limud Torah is learning Gemara, and what Gemara is all about is not actually necessarily learning the halacha, because you already did that. You're supposed to learn halacha psuka first. But that instead you're proving the validity of the text. You're proving, in many ways, you're experiencing halacha as being accurate in your learning of Gemara. I shared with you Rosh Gon. What he defined the Gemara as was just that. It's proving the validity of halacha, and it's exploring the ideas of the law. It's not concrete. It's really almost trying to reenact the fundamental debates that were going on in the yeshivas during the times of the Amoraim. It's kind of a funny thing because we don't relate to reading that way. When we sit down and read a book, we read a textbook, whatever it is, it's like we kind of think of it as absorbing information. But learning the Gemara is very different. It's exactly this, of reenacting the debates. And so you're only really given, it's almost like very, very long cliff notes, where you're given the bare bones that you need to understand there's a difficulty against a statement, but you're actually supposed to expand that. Act it out, and that's why we do it with a chavrusa. It's experiential. I shared the idea from Marshall McLuhan. That was the Canadian philosopher I was trying to think of. He died in the 80s. But Marshall McLuhan, his quote that the medium is the message. I was sharing the idea that, a large part of what is true, it's not so much the information per se, but it's how it's packaged. So you look at, the way that books package information, there's a loss to the truth because you lose the intonation, you lose the cadence of actual speech in a book. Well, if you take radio, you have that cadence, you have the intonation of the message, but you don't see what's going on. A good example of that is, the presidential debates between Kennedy and Nixon. It was just when TV was coming out. And so everybody that saw the debates on TV, they said, hands down, Kennedy won. But everybody that was listening to it on the radio, it's like, no way, Nixon totally blew Kennedy out of the water. Well, part of that is because Nixon sounded way more put together and intelligent. He is more articulate, and in many ways, fine, he was a crook, but he was a smart crook, let's put it that way. Whereas on television, a lot of people actually like what Kennedy had to say because Kennedy looked nicer. Nixon kind of looks creepy. And so that's what people were distracted by. Why
are you bringing that up?
Because the medium is what it is, the message, is the truth.
What's the medium?
The books, radio, TV. It's not as though truth is truth. It's like what's more important about truth is how it's presented, how it's packaged. How are you giving over the information? That really is what pragmatically matters.
So what's the quote?
That the medium is the message. That's the quote.
Who says it again?
Marshall McLuhan. And the same thing with TV is that, comparing TV to long form interviews, say on YouTube, well, you can listen to a 3-hour interview on YouTube and there's a lot of truth there. It's, unscripted, it's people's real beliefs, real positions, real debates going on. After 4 hours, people just get worn out and they really do hash it out. But on TV, you could, if you're the most interesting person on the planet, with the most interesting, complex idea, you will get 6 minutes and only 6 minutes to tell that to everybody. Well, that's not true. That's such an adulteration of whatever your message is. So much has been ripped out of whatever meaningful idea you had. It's fair to say that's not truth. And in TV, they had to do it that way because it's just so expensive to run TV. That's why they had to make these, very, very scripted, very orderly, short messages because they just couldn't afford it otherwise. So, technology is, like I was saying again, technology, the medium, is the more important part of giving truth. So, how does this kind of relate to Gemara? Well, we covered the idea that, Gemara, if we start looking at the research and gender differences, what we start to see is that a fair theory of, why it might not be advisable. There's debate. Some people, argue, according to halacha, girls should learn Gemara, some should. I'm not so much getting into that, but more so the idea behind it is, the Gemara is made for men. That looking at personality types, women are, generally speaking, they're different. They're more compassionate. They're more polite. They're more orderly. They're more threat sensitive. They're more enthusiastic. They're more open. Whereas men, they're more assertive. They're very disagreeable. And they like playing with ideas. And when you kind of line up all the gender differences in the research, you start to see, wait a second, the Gemara is actually a text that seems to be specifically written for men. It's combative. It's very disagreeable. It's not obvious what the conclusions are. So someone who's high in threat sensitivity will be put off by what's the answer? Someone who is more orderly will be irritated because the text itself is not written orderly. It's not written that sort of way. You have to have extreme high levels of industriousness to that, and again, it kind of favors men because you basically.
It's more disagreeable.
All you're doing is fighting.
The stories, you mean the examples they use?
The text. I mean, the basic structure of the Gemara is statement in halacha, attack against that statement, defense against that statement. And you're doing that ad infinitum. It's it's the same size as the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's very combative. It's not a pleasant read. And once more, it's not just something you read, but you act out. So you're kind of yelling at the other person. It's very emotional. And so, like I said, what bears out in the research is, that's not a text. It's not a good medium for women because women are more compassionate. Women are more reasonable that way. Women are more agreeable. Women,
if it's more,
yeah.
If women are more, what word did you just use?
Agreeable?
Not agreeable.
Compassionate?
And not compassionate.
Combative?
Not combative. You said more real, something like
orderly?
realistic?
I said reasonable. That was my summation,
So
but that's
women
more
are
editorial.
If they're
That's not a character trait. Reasonable is not a character trait. I'm just...
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
But if they're more reasonable, then how come if men are less reasonable, I guess, then why do we follow something like the Gemara if they just, wrote it and developed it if they're less reasonable?
Because I'm speaking tongue in cheek with the reasonable part, because there is something worth being disagreeable. You are more hard in terms of being willing to sacrifice relationship for facts. That's more of a male trait.
Okay.
I gave that research about the game, the being electrocuted game, where you had the two people who were in on the research and they were playing a game, and every time you got the answer wrong, you're given a little shock. And the other two players who were in on the experiment, one is selfish and one is actually playing nice. Well, every time the nice player gets shocked, both men and women had empathy for him. They said, wow, the mirror neurons are firing. It's like, man, that sucks. You got shocked. Whereas for the selfish player, here the gender differences just were quite clear, that men felt good that the cheater got shocked. There was pleasure that men got. You deserve to get shocked. That's very disagreeable. Whereas women still felt empathic. It's like, okay, they felt a little less empathic, and it wasn't statistically significant, so it's hard to tell if it was just, they didn't have a large enough pool of participants or what. But no, women stayed empathic, and agreeable and compassionate, and men are as disagreeable as sin. Good, you got shocked. That's a very male quality. And so the point I was making last class was, well, again, the medium is the message, that it's not as though there's some secret being hidden away in the Talmud somewhere. If you actually read the Mishnah Torah, you will literally cover every single thing that is mentioned in the Talmud. If you read the Ein Yaakov, you'll get all the Agadic stuff as well. Women do that. That's fine. There's no hidden agenda, no hidden information that's being kept away from women. It's really just a question of being effective. If you really want to change your behaviors and you really want to live a life of transcendence and you want to live a life of morality, well, it actually matters where and how you're trained. And you should, as a person, go to the best sources that are most most appropriate for who you are as a person. So that was the basic argument I was making last week. And we ended off with the two positions of, we had the question, what did Moshe Rabbeinu know? What did he receive at Har Sinai? And I presented there were two different opposing views. One was that he, in the 40 days, it's not such a long time to be up there, and he just got the basic definitions of the 613 commandments. He got the rules, the 13 midot, the 13 rules of how you interpret the Chumash. And that was it. Have a nice day. Moshe, work it out yourself for the next 40 years in the desert. The other position argued that, no, he got everything. He got every single Dvar Torah that will ever exist in the future. He heard every Derabanan. In fact, he heard this class when he was hanging out on Har Sinai. Moshe got everything. And that was the debate that was going on. The fundamental difference philosophically between these two views is really questionable. How creative is man? How active is man in the halachic process? I mean, we are created in God's image. We have Tzelem Elokim, and what Tzelem Elokim basically means is we're meaning-creating creatures. That's basically what it means. We're a medaber, we speak, and that question is, well, how far does our creativity go? For the second position, there's a lot of room for human creativity. For the first position, the first position, there's a lot of room for creativity. You got the general rules, have a nice day. The Rambam buys into that first position. The second position is, well, no, there's actually less room creatively for man to be active in creating halachas from the Chumash. And the second dispute philosophically between these two views is, well, the clarity of the message that Moshe was given. It's also kind of like, what the medium is the message, is that, well, when you're talking to God, there's instantaneous clarity. If you're someone like Moshe Rabbeinu, all you need is 40 days to get everything that will ever be taught in regards to Torah. So that's another philosophical point. That was last week. This week, I wanted to hit the idea of, well, what is Masorah and what is the mitzvahs aseh of Amunah? This one's important because you guys being in seminary, I'm willing to bet people throw a lot of names at you. The Rambam says this. The Rabbi Akiva Eiger says that. Rabbi Tarfon in the Gemara says this. I mean, you guys just throw names. And it's really important to know what those names signify, because every stage in the development of halacha, from the beginning to end, there's eras. This is one way of thinking about it. There were different halachic eras, and each generation, and they're usually each era lasts like 200 to 400 years each. Each era is different. It has qualities others lack, and it's really important to know because, well, if someone says my Rosh Hashiva says this, and well, the Gemara disagrees. It's like, I don't care what your Rosh Hashiva has to say. Your Rosh Hashiva is contradicting Shas itself. And he's wrong. Period. Just because you have the name Rabbi in front of your name means nothing if you are contradicting a Rishon, if you're contradicting the Gemara. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the pecking order. The second reason why this is kind of important is because, well, in understanding the chain of Masorah is, according to the Kuzari, fulfilling the mitzvah aseh of Amunah Pshuta. Amunah in Judaism does not mean, I believe. We are not fundamentalist Christians. We do not accept things at face value. We're the only fundamentalist religion that does not read its text literally. We're complicated. So you can't just believe something. We're not like most religions. Thank God. And the bare bones definition of Amunah, the mitzvahs aseh, of believing in the Torah, believing in God, the whole shebang, is knowing how the chain of the transmission of halacha works. Let's dive in. The first era of halacha lasted 200 years, were the zugot. These are, if you open up your Pirkei Avos, the first chapter is listing the pairs, the zugot of all these different. They were leading the base medrash, these two figures, and the way the Rambam describes this era of halacha was a time in which, sure, there were questions that arose, there were halachic problems that came up, but the mastery of halacha was such that any problem that came up was immediately resolved. The Beis Din was able to hear the problem, come to a decision, and there was complete halachic unity within Judaism. There's no machlokas. Period. And what's kind of cool is, well, the zugot really oftentimes, they actually were very antagonistic. I mean, there were a couple different pairs of guys that kind of got along nicely, and things didn't work out so well. There was conflict, and it was the process of conflict that enabled people to discover truth. And they did. Well, what ended up starting to happen at the very end of this era...
So the Beit Din can solve it because they were so close to the...
They knew their stuff. They knew their stuff well. There was a clear transmission of Masorah.
What does that mean?
What it means is that whether version 1, that Moshe passed on everything, they kept it, or they were really experts. There was no question of their expertise. Of version number 2 of they were able to use the mechanisms of the 13 midos and all this stuff and the general klolim to create halacha, create it properly, to derive from the text of the Chumash and arrive always at a clear halachic decision. But they could do it. That's the point, is they could do it. By the end of the Zugot, this is Hillel and Shammai, that was the first machlokas that could not be resolved. And it's a silly one. It was the question was, when you give a korban, a part of giving a korban is you have to lay both hands on the head of the animal, and you push it down, and there's a lot of symbolism that goes in there. Well, the question is, can you do that on Yom Tov? Because the animal is muktzah. So can you touch it? There are certain circumstances where derabbanans are relaxed at the temple, but it wasn't clear if this is an example of that. This is the first machlokas in Jewish history that could not be resolved. Do you push your animal around on Yom Tov?
Wait, so this is so there's the level, it's under Zugot?
This is Hillel and Shammai. They were one of the last Zugot. This is when machlokas starts to manifest itself in Judaism.
Isn't muktzah the only things that aren't useful on Shabbos?
No, not necessarily, no.
It's just like everything.
There can be a lot of things. Muktzah is a long discussion. But no, there's more than just that. It's more than just that. So animals are muktzah.
So the first unsolvable machlokas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one reason why that was going on is because this is when the Romans ran into town, and they were causing a lot of problems for the Jewish people. It was a lot of religious oppression, and I mean, we're also talking about a time where things are being written down. I mean, the Jewish people are literate, but it's not like you can look this sort of stuff up on Wikipedia. Like you have to really invest a lot of time memorizing all this stuff. And so, if you're on the run from the Romans or having to worry about, just economic hardships because of the shenanigans that they were pulling in Israel, it's like, well, it's hard to actually pay enough attention and dedicate enough time to your studies. So machlokas starts to build. The next era, which was last about 200 years, were the era of the Tanaim. These are the guys in the Mishnah that are quoted. And what was going on was, at this stage, machlokas is building. You're having large differences of opinion, and each Tana, the word just means teacher, each Tana is writing his own little notebooks of what he understands as what halacha is, and everybody has their own style of teaching, and they have their own students, and it's pretty disorganized. There wasn't a central text. And the reason we kind of covered last week is, well, it was actually prohibited. It's actually an issa deraisa to write down the Torah Shebaal Peh. But things got so bad that the very fabric of Judaism was threatened. The ability to arrive at practical halachic decisions was being threatened, and so Rabbi Yehuda Nasi came along and said, this can't be, and offered an argument that, sometimes in order to save the Torah, you have to sacrifice a few halachas. There's a greater good that would be served by breaking this prohibition, and they did. And he wrote down the Mishnah. It's actually a machlokas if he created the not that it was written down, but like had everybody commit it to memory. But suffice to say, it was written down, for the sake of argument.
So they wrote down the oral Torah?
They wrote down the Mishnah.
So just the Mishnah.
But he did it with a trick to try and kind of get out of this prohibition, that he wrote the Mishnah in such a way that it's not straightforward. It's actually a coded text. And that you have to compare and contrast the Mishnayos, one Mishnah against another, to arrive at what the halacha ought to be. So it's like he wrote it down in code. It's not exactly like he wrote it down. That's kind of how we got around that one. And it wasn't as though he was so clear on what the halacha is. I mean, you guys read Mishnayos, it's not like it reads, the halacha is ... There's a lot of room for, it's vague. There's some room for interpretation. The reason is because of this prohibition. Trying to we'll have a standardized text, but writing it down in such a way that we'll be able to work out what the halacha is from the standardized text, and we'll go on our merry way. The next era, that one lasted for about 300 years, is the Amoraim. What do these guys do? These are the Gemara guys. The big difference between the Amoraim and Tanaim is that the Tanaim actually use the 13 midos, the 13 hermeneutical rules of interpreting the Chumash. They actually are deriving halachas from the text. You read the text, eye for an eye. The Tanaim are the ones who say, no, eye for an eye does not mean you put people's eye out. It means that they have to pay for damages. And they had the authority to interpret because they knew how to properly use, like I said, these 13 midos.
So, wait,
yeah.
I'm just a little confused.
Yeah.
So, the Tanaim, teachers, Amoraim.
The speakers, that's what it literally means, the speakers. That's what the Amoraim are. They don't do that. They do not interpret the Chumash. We stopped doing that.
Okay, cool. So they don't interpret.
It's been 1,900 years since we have created a halacha from the Chumash.
How long?
1,900 years since we have created a new halacha using the Yud Gimel Midos. We don't do that anymore. We do not create halachas. Only the Tanaim did. End of story.
Does it, for example, when new technology came out, did new halachas need to be created?
Nope. It's all about comparing and contrasting.
Okay, fine.
It's like we have the halachas about fire is prohibited on Shabbos. Thomas Edison creates the light bulb. What's that? Is that fire? If we were Tanayim, what we would do is, we could, in theory, as Tanayim, use the Yud Gimel Midos and see, derive from the text, are light bulbs fire? But we don't do that anymore. We compare and contrast.
Okay.
That's all we do. So what the Amoraim did is they're not using the Yud Gimel Midos. What they're doing is they are explaining they're really they're the first Perush, honestly. They're speaking clearly. They're not speaking in code. They are, in a straightforward way, describing what is literally the position of the Tanayim. Because like I said, the Mishnah is an encoded text. It's like, well, what do these Tanayim mean? It's kind of weird. And there's not so much to go on when you're reading a Mishnah because it'll literally just read, Rabbi Eliezer says Asur and Rabbi Akiva says Mutter. Well, what the Amoraim do is they explain, well, what's the backstory behind that Mishnah?
How do they figure it out?
Because they one thing to kind of keep in mind is like at this stage we're not talking about such lengthy periods of time, and that there was a stable Jewish presence in at this time anyway in Iraq. After from the Zugot onwards up until really recent history, the Jewish people had a yeshiva in the city of Pumbedisa in Iraq. Pumbedisa is modern day Fallujah. And they were there and they had huge libraries and they had ancient texts and they dedicated their entire lives to the memorization of these texts. I mean, it used to be you'd have like individual students in the yeshivas, they would literally memorize an entire Masechta. So there was the Shabbos guy, there was the Gemara Makos guy, and if you had a problem, you'd just be like, hey, Shabbos guy, start reciting Masechet Shabbos, and he would just start reciting the thing. And you had people who memorized the whole thing. I mean, these guys were dedicating everything they had to knowing the whole Torah. So they had written text, they had libraries, they had memorized the whole thing. It was all there. So that's what the Amoraim did, and they were the ones who wrote the Gemara. And there was it's kind of cool actually. There are certain sections in Shas, like you're reading along, and like there'll be like a little little derech agav of like you'll have one Amora talking to another like, well, how's the Gemara coming these days? Where are you at in writing it? Like it's really cool. Like you kind of like
They put that in the Gemara?
yeah. Because I mean it was they were writing it. It took hundreds of years for the Gemara to be written.
How did they, like, Gemara's like a lot of stories, no?
No, it's halachic debates. Legal debates.
If my axe
Sometimes a
goes
little
to
bit,
my
but
neighbor,
rare. It's
I don't know
legal
why I
debates.
always like to hear stories from Gemara.
Yeah, they have some of those, but that's
Mashallah.
really not it, man. Like really not it. It's dry legal text, dry legal debates.
Okay.
That's it.
Cool.
Yep. So
A debate could be like a story, though.
not usually. No, pretty
It's
dry
like
stuff.
Two people talking to each other, that's what it's like?
Rava says, Abaye says, and it's really just like a
That's
dialogue.
it?
Yeah, it's really just dialogue. Yep.
My school made us. We did Gemara's mandatory for girls, and they always try to make us memorize the Tanaim. I never knew what
Yeah.
he's saying. I was so confused, and then
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it's like my axe went the neighbors and then their axe dies, and I obligated to pay for their axe, and mine.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Dry legal text. Yeah. It's like go get a law degree. It's like it's boring stuff, but it's interesting. I'm not trying to put it down, but it's like it's not what people think. It's not. That's why I was saying like it's not like anyone's hiding anything. Like girls should learn Gemara. Like ooh, it's fun stuff. No, it's about oxes goring each other.
Yeah.
I mean, just do yourself a favor. Like I said,
We did
go
a
read
whole
the Mishnah Torah. They have it in English, and you're all obligated to do it. You can't weasel out of it. Like, just go do that. You'll know it all.
My
read it
whole
once.
semester was just
Alright.
on.
And then you have fulfilled the mitzvah saseh of halacha psuka. Yes, go do it.
We
What do I
did months
Google?
just on
Hmm?
the
What do I
It's on Chabad.org, the Mishnah Torah, from beginning to end.
What?
Go for it. 3 chapters a day, you'll finish it in a year.
I don't think so.
3 chapters is a lot.
Well, it's worth it. All right, so that's the Amoraim, and in the process of writing the Gemara, there were two major redactions of it, where they were compiling all the information and ordering it, and this this very like technical sort of like how do you put each debate where, because they were basically compiling debates that spanned hundreds of years and making it sound as though like a guy who lived 400 years in the future is debating someone 400 years in the past. Like, they're really being meticulous. So it went through two redactions. The first was with Abaye and Rava, and then the second, at the very end, when the Gemara was sealed, was with Ravina and Ravashi.
Sorry, maybe I missed it. Did you say why they wrote the Gemara? Why did they?
Because it was the same problem that it just wasn't enough to maintain the proper understanding of halacha. Okay. So they ended up just having to write it out.
It's like more explanation.
More explanation.
Okay. Is that because society kept getting more complicated, or has it
Yep.
always been more complicated?
No, because it really at a certain point it was like once the Zugot started having problems and once Machlokas started to build, it just got worse. It just got worse. It was like an avalanche.
God knew this was gonna happen. Why didn't He let us write it down like as we go?
Well, that was the problem with as soon as you write something down, that text is. That was my Gulliver's Travels examples. Like language is frozen in time. Good luck reading Gulliver's Travels. It's in English. It was written 300 years ago. Like, try it out tonight. See, you'll see what I mean.
Watch the movie.
I'll watch the movie.
Why did they make the Gemara so complicated to understand if it was meant to help people to understand?
It's not so complicated.
Isn't it like really hard to learn how to read?
It's a lot of information. Yeah, it's a lot of information.
So you have to like learn how to read Gemara. Like it's not like you just.
It's a different language. I mean, it's Aramaic. It's a mix of ancient, different vernaculars of Aramaic, which again is another problem. A lot of people kind of get tripped up that like you can tell like they're spelling the same word differently because that part of the Gemara was written 200 years later, and the actual word itself is spelled differently.
So how is this supposed to help people understand it better if it's so much harder? It's like hard.
That's what I'm saying. Go read the Mishnah Torah. You'll be fine. But no, it's also not a personality. It's actually a genuinely difficult text. Like you really have to, and this is a part of it, is like you literally have to dedicate your life to it, which is hard to do because like.
So why didn't they just write the bottom line halacha?
They did. That's called the Mishnah Torah.
I know during
They did.
the Gemara.
It was sufficient. It's because as we're going through this, it's always like a stress of there's a prohibition of writing it down. It has to be a living, breathing, organic process. That's a part of serving God. It's not like an abstract idea serving God. It has to have this living feel to it. And so that's why it's so. But then you do have to write stuff down because tough times, people are fallible, and the more doubt that is put into the system, the more you have to prove your solution to the doubt. The weight of seriously taking on that we're trying to do God's will, as soon as you have the smallest doubt, demands a mountain of effort to prove your solution. That's big. It's not just, okay, I have a solution. You have to have the right solution. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's very, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it's if you're someone who has to have a varied life, you want to have a family, you want to, have friends, like, you really have to give up a lot to really go through this text. Like, you have to really have singular purpose in this. Not many men actually learn the Gemara. They read it. Very few, very, very few actually have mastered the text. Because you really have to sacrifice your life to do it. This is the medrash of Torah's Ohalim. The talking about that pasuk there, the way that they darshan that is because Ohalim is talking about when someone dies in a tent. So the play on that term Torah's Ohalim is like you have to kill yourself to learn the Torah. What it means is you have to sacrifice your whole life. Like that's a lot,
Who said that recently? Someone else said that, and I think you were like, "Do you mean kill your old self?" I don't know if you.
Someone did say that. Was it you?
Yeah, I also said
that. I was thinking about that.
I also had that one. That's right. I also said that. Yeah, that's another riff off of that medrash is you have to kill yourself and sacrifice your previous beliefs every day. man, that's a tough order. But it's more than that. It's actually like kill yourself, meaning like you're sacrificing your life. You're literally not doing anything else. You're literally giving up another profession because this is your profession. You're literally giving up time with your kids. I'm sorry, daddy's learning first, second, third, and fourth Seder. I'm going to basically see you when I get up in the morning and only for 15 minutes. It's like, honey, I love you. You're the one getting a job because I can't work. That's a sacrifice. This is tough stuff. Most people don't do this. But that's the text. It's a very difficult text. To say it's difficult is an understatement.
Wow.
But you have this in the secular world also. Is like when people become a lawyer or a doctor, it's like that's it. You're a doctor. Like, sorry, like you might have a wife, but you really don't. Wow. You might have a husband, but you really don't. That's how it is. And again, it's like, this is a broader topic of what do you guys want to do with your life. That's kind of what you need to do if you want a profession. Most people don't have professions. They have jobs. They have things they like to do. It's 9 to 5, and they come home and they actually have a real life. And then there's a few group of people, they actually tend to be men because that's a personality type. It's a biological personality type. The men just get this like weird OCD fixation on stuff, and they can do it, but you sacrifice a lot. So it's like, it puts into light why we might discourage girls from trying that. It's like, maybe you're sacrificing too much.
Hobby.
It's a cute little hobby. Okay, so that's the Amoraim. Then the next halachic era were the guys called the Sephardim. What they did was, this was about 100 years, and the Sephardim, the reason givers, that's what the term means, they are no longer explaining the position of the Tanaim. What they're doing is they're looking at the statements from the Amoraim, and they're giving an additional proof why they're right.
Wow, so the Tanaim are basically, they're gone.
They're gone, that's right, they're gone.
So what are these people called? I'm sorry, I couldn't catch it.
Sephardim,
Alright.
the reason givers.
Can you give an example of
Marzutra, I think he was like on the cusp of it. And basically what it would be like you would have a statement from an Amora explaining a Tana. And he would have the interpretation of the Tana, and this is rare. Like there's not so many Sephardim in Shas.
No longer explain.
They would give like an additional proof justifying the Amoraim's interpretation of the Tana. That's what they do.
Do we like them?
They don't come up so often. Most people skip them. The next stage is the Gaonim. Now where this is starting to get real life, because what the Gaonim did, their era lasted for about 400 years. And like I said, these are the guys hanging out in Pumbedisa. They had access to the libraries of the Sephardim. They had access to the writings of the Amoraim. They had access to everything. To argue with a Gaon, as the saying goes, is like arguing with God. That is the level of authority they have.
Like the Vilna Gaon.
Well, the Gaon means genius. The Vilna Gaon, he's an Achron. We're going to get to what those guys are. He does not have the status of the Gaonim. He is not like them.
Who's a famous Gaon? Yeah.
Rav Shira Gaon, Rav Hai Gaon, Rav Natroni Gaon. They have a lot of cool
Are
names.
they alive?
Nope, they are very, very dead.
So the Gaon lasted 400 years.
4 years. I mean, this is
And
between
they
the years
translate-
600 and 1000 Common Era. That's how long they were
They don't
hanging out.
sound. I never heard of any of these people.
Right.
Why?
Because you're not reading the Rambam.
Oh.
Got 'em.
All right. Oh, they quote him up.
These people translate.
Got to learn more
centuries.
halachic books. No, but you're not. They're not quoted so often. But basically, what they were doing is, at this stage in Jewish history, all of the scholars were located in this one part of the world, hanging out in Pumbedisa, Fallujah, and the Jewish people had kind of scattered. You had Jews living in Germany and Jews living in Italy. Like they were kind of, Morocco. They were all over the place, but they didn't have really sophisticated rabbis. They didn't have yeshivas. And so anytime a question, halacha, would come up, they would write a letter and they would wait 5 years to get the answer. And sometimes they wouldn't get an answer. My favorite response from the Gaonim, there was like some guy who wrote him a question on some weird esoteric question in divorce law. Imagine you're waiting 3 years for a response, right? Yeah. So finally the day comes. You get the letter. And what the Gaon had written was a scathing letter against this guy. It's like, it is obvious to me that you are asking stupid esoteric questions in law and you are not paying attention to the basics that you must master first. You are irresponsible. Do not, like that was the response. 3 years, bam, a punch in the face. Yeah. These guys were serious. So, but they were deciding all questions in Jewish law. So they were, say, Rav Amram Gaon is another famous example. He's the one who your siddur is based on what Rav Amram Gaon says to do.
I'm intimidated. They seem like the cool kids.
They are the cool kids. They are the cool kids. And so, even halachic positions that make no sense, we will do, because like I said, it's like arguing with them is like arguing with God. We just assume we don't know, and they had access to information we don't. So a good example is hatmana. You guys know what hatmana is? Mm-hmm. Okay, on Shabbos we all do it. Hatmana is we make our food before Shabbos comes in. We want to keep it warm, right? So we put it in such a way where we were preserving the heat. And it's not a malacha. You're not breaking any laws doing hatmana. It's great. You can do that on Shabbos. So the Gaonim say that on Yom Kippur, you cannot pre-prepare food and keep it warm. Why? No one knows. There is no straightforward halachic explanation of why I cannot pre-make food before Yom Kippur, keep it warm throughout the day. I'll set it up before. I'm not doing any malacha on Yom Kippur. Set it up, and then when Yom Kippur ends, I can immediately eat, because who wants to starve an extra hour while you're making food?
Me.
Prohibited. The Gaonim said, no, we don't do it. Do we have a reason why? Nope, no idea.
We should not let it cook before Yom Kippur,
You're not allowed to pre-cook and keep it warm throughout the day. That's hatmana, is keeping it warm. Hatmana means to encase. That's what the word means. To encase and keep it, to insulate the food to keep it warm. Prohibited. We have no idea why, but the Gaonim said it. We don't argue with it. It's like arguing with God. Okay. Those are the Gaonim.
So I feel like the reason givers, they just kind of like sucked. Like you have that?
Yeah. Then you have the Gaonim. Yeah. And I mean, these guys decided that, because we have two Gemaras, right? We have the Gemara Yushalmi, the Gemara Bavli. They decided we go with the Bavli. They're the ones who organized the siddur. It's like everything we take for granted in Judaism, the Gaonim had decided on it. Like, they're the guys. So cool. Okay. Now, the next stage, the next era lasted another 400 years, and this was the Rishonim. Now things are getting interesting now. What ended up happening was, the Jewish people, the communities are growing. They're growing in Italy. They're growing in Morocco. Things are happening. And there was a demand. Waiting 3 years and then getting a rude response back about your halacha question. Who wants that? So what ended up happening was, yeshivas developed outside of Pumbedisa. Scholars traveled, and now we have Gaonim in different parts of the world. In this moment in Jewish history is where the massive schism began between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. The first Gaon who traveled outside of Pumbedisa, he ended up in Tunisia, was Rav Husiel. And Rav Husiel had a student. His name was Rabbeinu Hananel. He had a student, Rabbeinu Nisim. He had a student, the Rif. He had a student, the Rimagash. He had the student, Rav Maimon. And he had a son, the Rambam. Oh. That is the Sephardi Masorah. Those are your guys. Anyone Sephardi in here? Those are your guys. That's your team. Starting with Rav Husiel. He is important to know. He's the first Gaon. He was really the last Gaon leading into the Rishonim. He's your guy. Well, in Europe, who's we Ashkenazi? Rabbeinu Gershom. He's our guy, and he had a student. The Reb Ben Yakar, and he had a student. Rashi, and he had a student. All of the Bali Tosfos, which was 1,000 different rabbis, and then the Rush came out of that, and that's the Ashkenazi halacha tradition. What makes the Rishonim unique is true they didn't have access to the entire literature that the Gaonim did, but it was a full a communication, a full giving over of their Masorah. When Rav Husiel gave his Torah to Rabbeinu Hananel, he gave it all. When Rabbeinu Hananel gave his Torah to Rabbeinu Nisim, he gave it all. It was ish mipi ish. from man to man. So when you see something from Rishon, you know the entire system of halacha is worked out. There is no contradiction in that man's entire understanding of halacha. That's what makes him a Rishon. That's the power of a Rishon. Now we're at today. The Achronim. Who are these guys? I'm an Achron. We're in the age of the Achronim. This one's lasted 500 years and we're still running strong. The Achronim, we like to read books. We're book people. We no longer have anybody who has worked out the entire Torah in such a way they can claim there is no contradiction in their positions.
Wow. They used to do that? They used to read the entire Torah?
That's right. That's what. Read the Mishnah Torah. That's the entire Masorah of the Rambam. That's the entire Torah.
Why can't you do that now?
Because we don't have access anymore. We don't. We don't. It was. I lived with this rabbi. I lived with him my entire life. I got everything out of this man. Hoo-ha. I mean, it used to be. They had stories in the Gemara. I mean, like students were obsessed with the rabbis. They would spy on them. They'd be stalkers.
Yeah.
If you were a rabbi, it was safe to assume all your students were stalking you and like hiding out in your bedroom and like in your closet and stuff. Like weird stories.
Are you serious?
Dead serious.
That's so weird.
Because Torah is not a written text, it's a life. It's a living, breathing thing that you act out.
In what era would people do that now?
I mean, there were stories in Gemara, people doing that, but even today, I mean, like, there's some fun stories of, students running around after Revolba, spying on him, and, yeah, like, that's a thing. That's a thing. Because the Torah is meant to be lived. It's not an idea. So you have to see it also. It's not just information.
Note to self, stock your teachers.
Yeah, stock your teachers. So the Achronim are different. There's a lot of traveling going on. It's not that people, the students are not hanging out the same way that they used to with their teachers and got their full Masorah transferred. So and now it's just books and books and books and books and books. It's all we got. Everyone's got books.
So we're like. Is there more from Achronim to us?
Well, here's the thing, because we're going to get a little more sophisticated because the
So the Achronim, they got everything written down and they study it and give what's in the books over. Is that what that?
That's what we're book people. Whatever is written in a book, and it's like you read, like you just like throw a stone in the air, it'll land on a machlokus. It's like everybody says something different. It's because there's just so much information just being like thrown out and processed, and because we lost at the time of the Zugot the ability to resolve disputes in halacha. We don't have a Sanhedrin Hagadol anymore. I mean, their job was to keep the ship afloat. Standardize halacha. That's a good thing. We don't want machlokas. We don't want, I have my rabbi. It's like, that's cute. No, like, we follow God, not your rabbi. And so, but we don't have that today. That the amount of doubt and the inability to resolve that doubt kept compounding itself exponentially. So here's the thing now, because now in today there's three different philosophies of halacha. That because we got a problem now. We have all of these Rishonim. We have all these different positions. So it's like, and even worse is like maybe you could get by when people weren't traveling so often and like you lived in your city and fair enough. But now that people are traveling everywhere, there's differences of opinion all over the place. So there were three different individuals who stepped up to the plate to try and resolve this problem, to reduce the number of opinions, reduce the complexity of halacha, to kind of act like the Sanhedrin Hagadol did. The first was the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo. He sat down, reading his introduction to his commentary on the tour. It's really cool that he outlines this problem I'm expressing to you guys. And he's like, okay, well, here's the deal. I could give you my independent halachic positions on everything if you wanted. But I want to standardize halacha. So what I'm going to do is, there's this principle that we learned out from the Gemara, because remember, the Gemara is the final say in halacha. Everything has to be sourced in a Gemara. If it's not in a Gemara, it doesn't count. Period. Even texts that were written at the time of the Gemara, that they're midrashim and they're Kabbalistic texts and all this stuff, like they're important, but if they contradict Shas, they're out. They do not count. We do not paskin like them. The Gemara is it. So the Beis Yosef says, fine, okay, like I want to take a principle from Shas, I want to take a principle from the Gemara, called Beis Din al Pi Rov, that I'm going to create a Beis Din, says Rav Yosef Karo, of 3 Rishonim, the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rush. They, he felt, created the most exhaustive written text of halacha. So you had basically, every position halacha they had in every area. So that's good. And we're voting best 2 out of 3. That's how he rolled. The Ramah, who was living at the same time as the Beis Yosef, got beat to the punch. He was actually writing a very similar text that the Beis Yosef was. So you read his introduction, it's kind of tragic, hearing like he spent years writing this text, and then the Beis Yosef came out before his. It's like his entire life's work is meaningless now, and it's like, what am I going to do with my life? And so what he did was, okay, fine. His solution was, okay, he scrapped his whole research project and said, fine, I'm just going to write a little commentary whenever Ashkenazi halacha would differ from the Beis Yosef. That's the Ramah. So you guys open up the Shulchan Aruch, the little in quotation guy, that's the Ramah. He just snuck himself in.
Cute.
And he had a different principle. He said, you can't tell me that you're making a Beis Din. I disagree with your philosophy, said the Ramah. You can't have a Beis Din made of dead people. The Rush is dead. The Rambam is dead. The Rif is dead. It's a bad philosophy of halacha. But what I do think is a good one, says the Ramah, is the idea of basrai, meaning in halacha we paskin according to later authorities. So the Ramah said, fine. The Rif and the Rambam and those guys, they were actually early Rishonim. So the Ramah says, you're breaking this basrai rule. That's also a source in the Gemara. And I'm going to throw all the young Rishonim at you. The Trumas Hadeshen, Maharam Barattenberg, the Or Zerua, these were the later Rishonim. And based on this principle, says the Ramah, this is how you should decide halacha. So that's what he did. Well, the Yam Shel Shlomo didn't like that. And the Gra didn't like that. They said, look, you can't start cherry-picking principles in Shas. You're right, Ramah, there is no Beis Din. You can't have a Beis Din to dead people. Fair enough. But you also can't argue and select these few Rishonim that you like, this Basrai idea. Well, that's not fair either. And in fact, this whole idea of striving for truth and arriving at halacha, well, who says we should pay so much attention to any Rishon? They're not the final say in halacha. Shas is the final say in halacha. That's when the halachic process of creation of halacha ended. So what they argued is no. What you do is you read the Gemara. And of course you read Rishonim, and you pick based on your understanding of Shas, the Rishon that fits according to your understanding of Shas. You cannot play games. You cannot cheat. You cannot ask other people for help. You have to learn the text yourself. You have to come to your own conclusions yourself. And if you're wrong, because that really was the concern of everybody, is, well, what if we're wrong? There's so many views. We want to do God's will. It's like, well, okay. Yeah, well, what if you're wrong? Maybe the process of deriving halacha is more important than being wrong, says the Yam Shel Shlomo. Maybe it's better to be wrong and actually try to understand Shas. And you're being responsible because you're also keeping within line of, my understanding of this part of Shas is such and such Rishon. Like you are supporting yourself on a larger authority. But maybe the process is more important. So that's his halakhic philosophy. And it's these 3 halakhic philosophies of the Beis Yosef, the Ramah, and the Yam Shel Shlomo that exist today. That is the halakhic process. Long and short.
What is Yosef Karo's, what was his thing? If said maybe the process of finding halakha is more important, if that was the Yam Shel Shlomo, then what was Yosef's and Ramah's?
So the Beis Yosef argued, he said, listen, there's this principle in the Gemara that you decide halacha based on a Beis Din. And the minimum size of a Beis Din is 3 rabbis. So he picked the most thorough 3 Rishonim that wrote the most in halacha and said, best 2 out of 3. Rif, Rambam, Rush. We're just taking a vote.
Okay.
And he actually, there's a large sections of of his book that he actually doesn't follow his own rules, and it's more of a guideline. That's a bit of a wrinkle in that philosophy of halacha. But that was his belief. That was his assertion that he made.
Okay.
And that's how Sephardim roll. That is the Sephardi philosophy of halacha.
Who was the people that he chose? Who's
Rif, Rambam, Rush. Two of them were Sephardim. One was Ashkenazi. So that's why the Ashkenazim don't make such a big splash in his Shulchan Aruch.
That's nice.
Yes.
All right. And then what was the Ramaz?
The Ramah was
It's like you can't have it based on dead people.
can't be as W. So we have another principle in Shas that we paskin halacha based on later authorities. So we should decide halacha based on all the last Rishonim.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay. So now these names really should mean something. When you hear the name of a Tana, when you hear, oh, is that a Gemara? Anyone says anything to you, your first question, no matter what Gemara is that from?
Mesechet.
Doesn't matter. It could sound beautiful. Your first question, which Gemara is that from?
Because it has to be from Gemara.
Gotta be from a Gemara. Gotta be from a Gemara. Or one of the Geonim, because like I said, you argue with them, you're arguing with God. But it's gotta be Gemara. You and them, it's gotta be Gemara.
What if I hear something in Parsha and I make it the right Torah? I learn my own lesson from it.
So that's also important. Because this gets into one reason. Well,
So
the Chumash is a narrative, and narratives are complex. It's like the best way to encode lots of information is make a story. And so it's fair enough. You can look at a text, you can look at a narrative and say, you know what, I find certain ideas compelling, certain moral behaviors compelling, but it can't contradict halacha. First of all, this is one reason why you really should. You're all obligated. Mishnah Torah tonight, 3 chapters. Chabad.org. It's whatever you say can't contradict halacha. First of all,
Right.
but it is fair to take out lessons from narratives in the Chumash. Just don't contradict halacha.
Okay,
Yep, that's it.
sure.
Yeah, sure.
That is so cool. I want to know what it's going to look like.
So and number 2, so that's one reason to know this is to protect yourself. Don't bite people's jive. That's basically it. People like to be inventive. I have an idea. So, okay, it's cute. You have an idea, and maybe it's a good idea. I'm not trying to make fun of it, but there's a science to it, and it has to be rooted in the Gemara. And Rishonim are different than Achronim, and it's kind of silly to say, well, Rav Moshe Feinstein argues with the Rambam. It's okay, give me a break. They're different creatures. The Rambam's a Rishon, Rav Moshe's an Achron. I love Rav Moshe. Definitely listen. He doesn't contradict the Rishonim, but it's but you have to. You can't just buy into the name game. That's the point I'm making. Number 2 is all this information I gave over, understanding the mechanics of how halacha was evolved, passed on, the challenges of preserving the Masorah. This is the mitzvah aseh of Emunah Pshuta. We do not just believe. Morality is a science. Divine ethics is a science. And you are obligated to know how that machine works. If you don't know, you are not fulfilling mitzvah aseh of Emunah. Period.
Right.
We didn't get so much time into diving into this idea, but even that, the idea of the mitzvah of Emunah is a machlokas. The kuzari is what I'm presenting with you, Emunah Pshuta and the Masorah, the whole thing. Well, the Rambam, also the Ramchal, expresses this idea. Rambam, Rishon, Ramchal, Achron, express the idea. Well, you can't only accept the Masorah. You actually have to prove it. You have to prove belief in God.
Oh my.
Right. It's a harder one. It's called chakira. Proving belief in you look in the 13 principles of faith that the Rambam outlined. Well, the first 3 he actually offers proofs for, intellectual, rational proofs for the existence of God. For him, the mitzvah of Emunah demands you do that. For the kuzari, your Emunah and belief in God can stop with today's shir.
Oh. Right.
Pick one then. All right. Cool.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Take it easy.
That was pretty cool, Rabbi.
That was pretty cool.